In 1939, Billie Holiday married the biggest mistake of her life. Jimmy Monroe was handsome, appeared wealthy, and promised Billie every luxury that fame could bring. In their wedding photos, they were both smiling, Billie in a white dress, Jimmy in a tuxedo, and Harlem's jazz elite applauding. But as soon as the honeymoon ended, Monroe dropped his mask. After the first night, there were bruises on Billie's arms. After the second week, Monroe made Billie wait at a Harlem brothel for a business meeting. After the third month, Billie started using heroin, Monroe's gift. And after the sixth month, Billie understood the man she married wasn't a husband. He was a pimp, but by then it was too late to escape. Because Monroe wasn't just Billie's husband, he was also a Harlem mafia man, and nobody escaped from him. If you love these kinds of dark, true stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we'll keep sharing the most shocking secrets of music history, the truths nobody tells. In the fall of 1938, Billie Holiday was 23 years old and climbing to the peak of her career. She was working with Count Basie's orchestra. Strange fruit hadn't entered her life yet, but her voice was already becoming legendary. New York's jazz clubs wanted Billie, record companies were after her, and fans gave her standing ovations at every performance. But Billie's personal life was a disaster. Her relationship with her mother Sadie was toxic. Her father Clarence had never acknowledged her, and past relationships had always ended in pain. Billie was looking for love, but couldn't find it until she met Jimmy Monroe. Jimmy Monroe was 32 years old, tall, handsome, and always wore expensive suits. Everyone in Harlem knew him, but nobody knew exactly what he did for a living. Some said he ran a restaurant, some said he dealt in real estate, others whispered darker things. But Jimmy Monroe had money, had connections, and had charisma. The first night he saw Billie, Monroe came backstage and introduced himself. "I'm Jimmy Monroe. I heard your voice, and I'm impressed. How about a drink?" Billie hesitated, but Monroe's smile seemed genuine, and that night she had a drink with him, then another drink. And then every night, the first months were perfect. Monroe sent Billie flowers, took her to expensive dinners, and treated her like she was a queen. For the first time in her life, Billie felt that a man truly cared about her. Monroe told her, "You're a queen, Billie, and I'm going to make you live like one." Billie believed him because she had nothing but belief. Monroe also showed interest in Billie's career, suggesting which clubs she should play at, discussing which songs she should sing, and sitting in on meetings with her managers. Billie saw this as support, but in reality, Monroe was building control. Slowly, invisibly, he was seeping into every corner of Billie's life, and by the time Billie noticed, it was too late. In August 1939, Monroe proposed to Billie at a luxury restaurant in Harlem with champagne and on his knee. Billie said yes, because Monroe promised her security, promised love, and promised a family. The wedding took place a few weeks later, a small ceremony, close friends, and it was the happiest day of Billie's life. In the wedding photos, Billie was in a white dress, gardenia flowers in her hair, and hope in her eyes. Monroe was in a tuxedo, handsome and smiling. But Billie didn't yet know what lay behind that smile, because when the honeymoon ended, Jimmy Monroe's true face would emerge. And that face was the most terrifying thing Billie had ever seen. The honeymoon was brief. Just a weekend at a small hotel in upstate New York. Monroe was romantic, gentle, and Billie thought maybe she really would be happy. But when they returned to Manhattan, everything changed. The first night, Monroe came home late, drunk, and Billie asked, "Where were you?" Monroe answered in a cold voice, "Working." Billie asked, "What work?" And Monroe exploded. He yelled, cursed, and pushed Billie against the wall. Billie was shocked because Monroe had never acted this way. But Monroe wasn't finished. He grabbed Billie's arms so tightly Billie moaned in pain and said, "You're my wife. You don't question me. you obey me. Then he let go and went to the bedroom. Billie stood there, with finger marks forming bruises on her arm, and felt fear for the first time. The next morning, Monroe acted as if nothing had happened. He made breakfast, kissed Billie, and went to work. Billie told herself, maybe it was just a bad night, maybe it was the alcohol, but it happened again that night, and the next night, and the next week. Monroe's rage fits were irregular but violent. Sometimes he pulled Billie's hair, sometimes he slapped her, sometimes he just yelled, and every time he told Billie the same thing: "You're my property. I made you, and I can destroy you." Billie tried to resist at first, but Monroe got harsher each time, and Billie understood, if she tried to escape, Monroe could kill her. Because Monroe wasn't just her husband, he was also a dangerous man. After the first month, Billie wanted to tell her friends, but she was ashamed. How would she explain? Saying, "My husband beats me," was too simple, but the truth was far more complex. Because Monroe wasn't just applying physical violence, he was also using psychological manipulation. One day he'd beat Billie, the next day he'd buy flowers and apologize. One week he'd demean Billie, the next week he'd praise her to the skies. Billie didn't know what to think. Maybe the problem was with her. Maybe she was doing something to anger Monroe. Maybe if she was a better wife, Monroe would change. These thoughts kept Billie imprisoned, but the real prison hadn't come yet, because Monroe had other plans for Billie, and these plans were much darker. At the end of the second month, Monroe talked to Billie about a new business opportunity. One evening, he came home and said, "Billie, I need to talk to you about something. I have some business associates, and they want to meet you. You're famous, they're fans. We're going to dinner with them tomorrow night." Billie found it strange, but Monroe insisted, "This is a good opportunity. These men are powerful, and they can help us." Billie agreed, because she was afraid of the consequences of refusing. The next night, Monroe took Billie to a building on a deep Harlem street. The building looked like a normal apartment from the outside, but inside was different. Red lights, thick curtains, and a strange silence. Monroe took Billie upstairs and into a room. 3 men were sitting there, older men, in expensive suits, drinking whiskey. Monroe introduced Billie. "Gentlemen, I present to you." The men looked at Billie, smiled, and Monroe said, "Billie, these gentlemen are my business partners. Spend some time with them. Be nice. I'll be downstairs." And Monroe left the room. Billie understood at that moment, this wasn't a dinner, this was something else. One of the men approached Billie and said, "Sit down, have a drink." Billie sat but wasn't comfortable. The men asked her questions. "Where do you sing? What songs do you like? Who do you work with?" But the questions gradually became more personal. "Are you married? Do you have children? What kind of men do you like?" Billie didn't want to answer, but she was scared. An hour later, Monroe came back and said, "Billie, let's go." When they got in the car, Billie asked, "Who were those men?" Monroe answered in a cold voice, "My business associates. And you're going to be nice to them, because they're making us money." In the following weeks, these meetings repeated. Each time Monroe took Billie to a different place. Luxury hotels, secret clubs, or private homes. And each time, Billie had to spend time with Monroe's business associate. At first she just talked, but then the demands increased. The men started wanting more from Billie: dance, sing, hug, kiss. When Billie refused, Monroe punished her when they got home, beating her, yelling at her, and threatening her. "You're no different from a whore," Monroe would say. "You get on stage, you look at men, you make money. This is the same thing, just more money." Billie cried, but Monroe didn't care, because to Monroe Billie was an investment, and this investment had to bring maximum profit. At the beginning of the 3rd month, Monroe gave Billie a small package, wrapped in brown paper. It contained white powder. Billie asked, "What is this?" Monroe smiled and said, "A gift for you. This will relax you, ease your pain, and make you happy." Billie looked suspiciously and said, I don't use drugs. Monroe laughed and said, this isn't drugs, just medicine. All the celebrities use it. Louis Armstrong uses it. Duke Ellington uses it. Everyone uses it. You should use it too because you're under stress.
Yes.
Billie hesitated, but Monroe insisted, try it once. If you don't like it, you can stop. That night, Billie used heroin for the first time. Monroe showed her how to use it. Put the powder in a small spoon. Heat it from below. When it melts, draw it with a needle and inject it into your arm. Billie was scared, but Monroe was being gentle, gentle for the first time in a long time, and Billie was desperate for this version of him. When the needle went into her arm, Billie felt pain, but then something else happened. All her pain disappeared, all her fear disappeared, and the world felt soft, warm, and
Hi.
at that moment, Billie understood why people used this, because heroin provided an escape from reality, and Billie had much to escape from. In the first weeks, Billie only used it occasionally when Monroe gave it to her, especially after a difficult day or before those business. Monroe would say, this will relax you, make it easier, and it really did. When she used heroin, Billie could more easily tolerate spending time with Monroe's business associate.
Oh.
Their touches didn't feel as disturbing, their words weren't as hurtful, and Billie felt outside her body, as if watching something happen to someone else. But within 6 months, Billie was addicted. Now she wanted to use it every day, not just when Monroe gave it to her. When she woke up in the morning, her first thought was heroin. When she went to bed at night, her last thought was heroin, and Monroe noticed, and Monroe was very happy, because an addicted Billie was a controllable Billie. Now Billie did whatever Monroe told her, because Billie needed drugs, and Monroe was the only one providing them. Even if Billie wanted to escape, she couldn't, because finding drugs on the street was difficult, expensive, and dangerous. Monroe, however, always gave it to Billie for free, but with one condition: obedience.
Joy.
And Billie obeyed because she had no choice. Heroin had taken her prisoner, and Monroe held the key. This strategy was perfect for Monroe because now he didn't even need to beat Billie. He just had to cut off the drugs, and Billie would do anything. By the 6th month, Billie understood everything. Monroe's work wasn't restaurants or real estate. Monroe was part of a crime organization: prostitution, drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and worse things. Exactly which mafia family he was connected to was unclear. Some records linked him to Lucky Luciano's circle, others to Harlem's local gangs, but the result was the same. Monroe was a dangerous man, and Billie had become part of him. Monroe used Billie because she was a famous jazz singer. Billie had connections, access to important people, and appeared trustworthy. Monroe used these advantages to expand his business. What Monroe asked of Billie became increasingly dangerous, not just spending time with business associates, but also carrying messages, delivering packages, and sometimes giving false statements. Billie once gave a statement to the police and said Monroe was innocent because Monroe had threatened her, "If you tell the truth, I'll kill you, and nobody will find you." Billie believed him because she knew Monroe's connections. Monroe wasn't just her husband. He was also part of Harlem's underworld, and in that world, nobody escaped. Billie's friends started noticing. Sadie Fagan, Billie's mother, visited Billie one day and saw the needle marks on her arms. "Billie, what are you doing?" Sadie asked. Billie lied, "Nothing, just stage nerves." But Sadie wasn't convinced. Count Basie, Billie's former boss, pulled Billie aside one day and said, "Billie, Monroe isn't a good man. You should stay away from him." Billie replied, "He's my husband. I love him." But she didn't tell the truth. She was scared, she was addicted, and she couldn't see a way out. Because Monroe wasn't just Billie's husband, he was also her jailer, and there was no escape from this prison. In early 1940, Billie tried to escape for the first time. Monroe went out of town for a weekend, and Billie saw the opportunity. She packed a few clothes, took some money, and went to her mother Sadie's house. When Sadie opened the door, Billie was crying, trembling, and said, "Mom, help me. Monroe is going to kill me." Sadie was shocked but let her in. Billie told everything: the violence, the brothel, the heroin, the mafia. Sadie believed her because she saw the marks on Billie's arms, saw the bruises on her face, and saw the fear in her eyes. Sadie said, "Stay here, I'll protect you." But 2 days later, Monroe came. He knocked on Sadie's door, and when Sadie opened it, Monroe was smiling. "Hello, Mrs. Fagan, I'm looking for my wife." Sadie tried to close the door, but Monroe was stronger. He came in, found Billie, and said in a gentle voice, "Billie, we're going home." Billie resisted. "No, I'm not coming with you." Monroe's face changed. He looked at Sadie and said, "Mrs. Fagan, if you interfere with this, I'll destroy you and Billie. You can call the police, but I have friends on the force. You can hire a lawyer, but my lawyers are better. You have no chance of winning." Sadie was scared because Monroe's seriousness was obvious. Billie understood she couldn't escape from Monroe. She went home. After that night, Monroe started controlling Billie more tightly. Now he didn't leave Billie alone, locked her in the house, and listened to her phone calls. When Billie sang on stage, Monroe waited in the background, and after the performance, he immediately took Billie home. When friends asked, Billie answered with a smile, "Monroe is protective, but that's good." But the truth was very different. Billie was in a prison, and Monroe was the guard. And worst of all, Billie was no longer fighting. The heroin addiction had progressed so much that Billie's only thought was the next dose. Everything Monroe did, violence, exploitation, rape, had now become normalized for Billie. Because heroin covered the pain, and without it, Billie couldn't live. In 1940 and 1941, Billie's career started suffering damage. She was late to concerts, sometimes didn't go at all, and her performances were inconsistent. One night she sang beautifully. The next night she had no voice because she was withdrawing from heroin. Record companies were worried, club owners were complaining, and fans were disappointed. But Monroe didn't care. In fact, he wanted Billie's career to end because then Billie would be completely dependent on him. Monroe would tell Billie, "You're not what you used to be. You're losing your voice. Maybe you should retire." Billie was scared because singing was her only freedom. But Monroe seemed right. Billie's voice was really changing, getting damaged, and maybe her career really was over. But the truth was, Billie's voice was getting damaged because Monroe had made her a heroin addict, subjected her to physical and psychological violence, and kept her under constant stress. Billie was still talented, still a powerful singer, but Monroe was destroying her. And Monroe was doing this deliberately. Because an unsuccessful Billie was a Billie more dependent on Monroe. An unsuccessful Billie was a Billie easier for Monroe to control. And an unsuccessful Billie was a more useful Billie in Monroe's business. This strategy worked. By the end of 1941, Billie's career was almost over. Big clubs didn't want her, record companies were canceling contracts, and Billie was losing income. But Monroe didn't care, because Monroe had other sources of income, selling Billie's body. In the fall of 1941, Billie tried to escape for the second time. This time it was more planned. She borrowed some money from a friend, rented a hotel room, and left the house when Monroe was at work. For 3 days, she stayed in the hotel room, didn't communicate with anyone, and hid. But heroin withdrawal started shaking, sweating, vomiting, and unbearable pain. Billie told herself, "I have to endure. If I go back to Monroe, he'll kill me." But on the 4th day, Billie couldn't take it. She realized she couldn't live without heroin, and nobody but Monroe would give her heroin. She left the hotel, called Monroe, and said, "I want to come home." Monroe came to pick her up. He didn't say anything in the car. When they got home, Billie apologized. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Monroe smiled and said, I know. Then he gave Billie heroin. Billie injected it and felt relief. But then Monroe dropped the mask. He slapped Billie, knocked her to the floor, and started kicking. Shouting, he said, you're going to understand that you can't escape from me. Every time you escape, I'll bring you back, and each time the punishment will be worse. Billie was curled up on the floor, crying and begging, please stop. But Monroe didn't stop. For an hour he beat Billie, and then he left. Billie lay there, bleeding, with broken bones, and understood there was no escape from Monroe. There never would be. In the following weeks, Billie was in the hospital. The official reason was recorded as fell down the stairs, but the doctors knew the truth. Nurses saw the needle marks on Billie's arms. The bruises on her body were undeniable, and someone asked, who did this? Billie didn't answer, because answering could be fatal. Monroe came to the hospital every day, brought flowers, and held Billie's hand. To visitors, Monroe seemed like a perfect husband. But Billie knew the truth. Monroe was just checking on his investment, and this investment hadn't been depleted yet. By 1942, Billie was completely isolated. Monroe had separated her from her friends, distanced her from her family, and her only social interaction was stage performances. But Monroe accompanied her even to the stage. He'd sit backstage, listen to every conversation, and threaten anyone who talked to Billie. Jazz musicians noticed. Lester Young, Billie's closest friend, tried to talk to Billie one day. Lady, are you okay? You look different. Billie tried to smile and said, I'm fine, Prez, just tired. But Lester saw the fear in her eyes, saw Monroe watching from the corner, and Lester understood Billie was in danger, but helping was impossible. Monroe's control wasn't just physical, it was also financial. Every dollar Billie earned went to Monroe. He had access to Billie's bank accounts, signed her contracts, and managed all the money. He gave Billie only a small allowance, and even that depended on Monroe's mood. When Billie protested, Monroe said, I'm your husband. I manage the finances. You just sing and shut up. Billie had no choice. Monroe wasn't just her husband. He was also her boss, her manager, and her prison guard. Everything was under Monroe's control, and Billie was just a puppet. Loneliness was slowly killing Billie. Nights were the worst. When Monroe was out on business, Billie would sit alone at home, inject heroin, and cry. Sometimes she'd stare at the mirror for hours and didn't recognize herself. The bruises on her face, the emptiness in her eyes, and the thinness of her body. This woman wasn't Billie Holiday. This was a ghost. Sometimes she thought about suicide. Maybe jump out the window, maybe take too much heroin, maybe use Monroe's gun. But each time she was scared, not of death, but of Monroe, because if she tried to commit suicide and failed, Monroe's punishment would be unimaginable. And Billie knew Monroe would never let her die, because a dead Billie wouldn't make money. In mid-1942, a few people tried to help Billie. John Hammond, the famous music producer and one of the first supporters of Billie's career, confronted Monroe. One day he found Monroe at a club and said, Monroe, what are you doing to Billie? She's a great artist, but you're destroying her. Monroe calmly smiled and said, Hammond, it's none of your business. Billie is my wife, and I do what I want with her. Hammond persisted. If you continue, I'll go to the police. Monroe's face changed. He approached, whispered in Hammond's ear, if you go to the police, I'll finish you, and I'll finish Billie too. Your choice. Hammond backed down, because he knew Monroe's threats weren't empty. Similarly, Billie's mother, Sadie, tried to intervene several times. She called the police, thought about hiring a lawyer, and even confronted Monroe. But each time the result was the same. Monroe was too powerful, too connected, and too dangerous. Sadie once told Monroe, leave my daughter alone, or I'll destroy you. Monroe laughed and said, Mrs. Fagan, who are you to destroy me? I work with powerful people. there's nothing you can do. Sadie understood she couldn't save her daughter, and this pain was unbearable. In the following years, Sadie started drinking, fell into depression, and her relationship with Billie completely broke down. Because Sadie blamed herself, she couldn't protect her daughter. The Harlem jazz community also stayed silent. Everyone knew what was happening to Billie, but nobody spoke, out of fear. Maybe, but also because of the culture of that era, violence against women was considered normal, marriage was considered private, and interfering was inappropriate. Also, Monroe had mafia connections, and nobody wanted to deal with the mafia. The result, Billie was left alone. The world listened to her, applauded her, and loved her, but nobody rescued her. This hypocrisy deeply wounded Billie. In later years, Billie said in an interview, "You're on stage, thousands of people love you, but at home you're alone, and nobody hears you." This sentence is the summary of the Monroe marriage. At the beginning of 1943, Billie finally made a decision. She had to divorce. But this decision wasn't easy, because Monroe had said he wouldn't accept divorce. Billie's lawyer, a female attorney named Gloria Johnson, took the case. Billie told her everything: violence, heroin, brothel, mafia. Johnson was shocked, but was professional. She said, "Billie, we can win this, but it will be hard. Monroe is powerful and dangerous, but you have witnesses, you have evidence, and you have courage. If we proceed, we can win." Billie agreed, but was scared. When the divorce case started, Monroe went on the offensive. His lawyers tried to portray Billie as a bad woman, drug addict, immoral, and unstable. Monroe lied in court. "I love Billie. When she got sick, I supported her. But she cheated on me, used drugs, and now wants a divorce because she's with another man." Billie's lawyer presented evidence: hospital reports, witness statements, and evidence that the needle marks on Billie's arms were given by Monroe. But Monroe's lawyers were more powerful, more expensive, and probably had influenced the judge. The case lasted 6 months. At every hearing, Monroe gave Billie threatening looks. One day outside the courthouse, he approached Billie and whispered, "If you win this case, I'll kill you." Billie believed him, but she didn't back down, because this was her only chance. Finally, in October 1943, the court issued its decision: divorce granted. Billie won, but the victory was short-lived, because Monroe's threats didn't end. As they left the courthouse, Monroe told Billie, "This isn't over. You belong to me and always will." And Monroe was right, because the heroin addiction continued. The psychological trauma hadn't healed, and Monroe's shadow lasted until the end of Billie's life. After the divorce, Billie thought she was free, but the truth was very different. The heroin addiction continued, and Billie remained addicted throughout her life. Monroe had made her addicted, and this addiction killed Billie in 1959. The physical and psychological trauma Monroe inflicted never healed either. Billie was also subjected to violence in subsequent relationships because Monroe had taught her love meant pain, men were dangerous, and trust was impossible. Billie's second and third marriages also ended in disaster because Billie always chose the same type of men: controlling, violent, and manipulative. Monroe had created a pattern, and Billie could never break free from that pattern. The damage Monroe caused to Billie's career was also permanent. In the early 1940s, Billie's voice had been damaged, her contracts had been canceled, and her reputation had been shaken. Billie came back in later years, became a legend with strange fruit, and rose to the top again. But the traces of those dark years always remained. Billie's voice no longer carried that young, fresh tone. Now it was more broken, more pain-filled, more real. Some said this made Billie a better artist, because pain deepened art. But the truth was, if Billie had a choice, she would have chosen happiness, not pain. Monroe deprived her of that choice. In the late 1940s, Jimmy Monroe's name disappeared from records. Some said he went to prison, some said he was killed, some said he moved to another city. But what was certain was this: Monroe physically left Billie's life, but never left spiritually. In her autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, published in 1956, Billie wrote very little about Monroe. Just one sentence: "My first marriage was a disaster. That's it." But behind that short sentence were years of violence, exploitation, and trauma. Billie didn't write the details because she was still scared. Even when Monroe died, Billie couldn't escape his shadow, because Monroe wasn't just a husband, he was also a monster, and that monster was carved into Billie's soul. The Monroe marriage had a side effect. Billie's music changed. In the late 1930s, Billie sang young, cheerful, and hopeful songs. But after the 1940s, Billie's songs became darker, sadder, and deeper. Strange Fruit, Gloomy Sunday, Good Morning Heartache, all were songs about pain, and Billie wasn't just singing these songs, she was living them. Every note was her own pain, every word was her own story. Audiences felt this. When Billie went on stage, she wasn't just singing, she was confessing, and audiences cried because Billie's pain was so real that it touched everyone. But this pain required a price. Billie reopened her wounds at every performance, remembered Monroe again, and relived the trauma. Some nights she couldn't go on stage because it was too painful. Some nights she went on stage but started crying in the middle. Audiences saw this as emotional expression, but in reality, Billie was at the breaking point. Monroe had poisoned not just Billie's body, but also her art, because Billie could no longer sing without pain, and the pain became more unbearable every day. By the late 1950s, Billie's health completely broke down. Heroin addiction destroyed her liver, her lungs were damaged, and her heart weakened. Doctors said, "If you don't quit drugs, you'll die within a year." Billie tried to quit, but couldn't. Because heroin wasn't just a physical addiction, it was also a psychological escape. Without heroin, Billie remembered Monroe, remembered the violence, and remembered the brothel. With heroin, these memories became blurry, became tolerable. Billie had to make a choice: live with pain or die with heroin. Billie chose heroin, and in 1959, at 44 years old, she died. Official cause of death: liver cirrhosis and heart failure. Real cause of death: Jimmy Monroe. Jimmy Monroe was never punished. He never stood trial for the violence, exploitation, and drug addiction he inflicted on Billie. The divorce case only ended the marriage, but didn't put Monroe in prison, because in 1940s America, violence against women wasn't considered a serious crime. Police didn't intervene, courts didn't punish, and society stayed silent. Monroe took advantage of this. He destroyed Billie, stole her money, destroyed her health, and faced no consequences. This injustice deeply wounded Billie. In her final years, Billie said in an interview, "My greatest pain is this: those who did evil to me never got punished." Monroe is still out there, free, and maybe destroying another woman, and I'm here, dying. This story isn't just Billie Holiday's story. This is the story of thousands of women, women who experience violence, are exploited, and stay silent. In the 1940s, 1950s, and still today, Monroe wasn't just a monster. He was also a product of a system that empowers men, leaves women unprotected, and denies justice. Billie was a victim of this system, but she didn't stay silent. In her music, she told her story, shared her pain, and warned future generations. Strange Fruit isn't just about racism, it's also about violence against women. Good Morning Heartache isn't just about heartbreak, it's also about the struggle to survive. Every song of Billie's is a memory, a warning, and a cry of resistance. Billie Holiday died in 1959, but her story still lives. Because this story isn't finished. Thousands of women are still married to men like Monroe. Thousands of women still experience violence. Thousands of women are still pushed into heroin or other addictions, and still society stays silent. Billie's story reminds us violence can never be accepted, exploitation can never be normalized, and injustice can never be ignored. Billie used her voice, with her music, with her life, and with her death. Now it's our turn to use our voice. Jimmy Monroe destroyed Billie Holiday, but Billie Holiday's legacy can never be destroyed. Her voice is still heard, her songs are still sung, and her story is still told. And with each telling, a woman becomes stronger, a woman finds the courage to speak, and a woman chooses escape. Perhaps Billie's greatest victory is this: Monroe killed her, but couldn't silence her. Billie Holiday speaks forever, and we must listen. If you or someone you know is a victim of violence, please seek help. Don't stay silent. Because Billie Holiday taught us, silence means death, but voice means freedom, and every woman deserves freedom.